They've put me in the garden today with the animals. Then you go, oh! So here I am, I'm sitting with one of my mentors, really smart, switched on woman, and she was just someone who reached out and just caught me at the right time, you know. And we were having a conversation about life, and she brought up at me, she said to me, okay Mitch, she said, let's say you've passed away, and she said, you know, you're at the church and you're listening to your eulogy being read out. How would you be remembered? And I remember sitting there thinking, I thought, oh, this is a great example for me to bloat and gloat on myself. So I said, you know, I'd be remembered for having integrity and awake and driven and inspired and being loving and da-da-da-da-da. And she said, okay, that's lovely. She said, now I want you to think, let's say we're still there and somebody is reading out all of the things that you never did, that you wanted to do, but you never actually did. She said, what would those things be? And I remember sitting back and thinking, my God, the list of things that I would love to do in my life that I haven't done is extensive. And I started to write down all the things that I realized that I hadn't done, that I wanted to do. And then I started to contemplate what was stopping me from doing those things. You know, what was actually going on in my mind? What was the self-conversation I was having that was hindering me from being, you know, financially free or abundant or having the wealth to travel where I wanted to travel? What was holding me back from being the educator that I wanted to be, from touching people's lives? What was going on inside of my mind? So she did a really cool exercise with me from that point that I want to share with you now, that I want you to do as well. So if you got your phone, if you're listening to this on your phone, you got to go to your notes in a couple of minutes after this video is over, and I want you to do the following 3 exercises. The first exercise is this. I want you to contemplate, let's say you could give yourself some advice from where you are now in your life, but the person that you're advising is 10 years younger than you now. What would you say to that person? What advice would you give them around their relationships that they're going to have within the next 10 years? What advice would you give them around their financial structures that they've set up for themselves within the next 10 years? What advice would you give them around their career, around their vocation? What advice would you give them around the time that they spend with their family? What advice would you actually give yourself if you could look back on time and speak to yourself 10 years ago? Now, when I did this, it really moved me, because I suddenly realized that, you know, I was caught in some cycles in my life 10 years ago, and in actual fact, I was still repeating those cycles. I still wasn't having the level of a relationship that I wanted to have. And the conversation I wanted to have with myself 10 years ago was, come on, buddy, be courageous, step up, don't be afraid, say the things you want to say, live your life, you know, be inspired, go and educate yourself over here, go and learn these techniques, implement them into your life. Because I think people tend to ignore life, they tend to ignore the gorilla in the corner. You know, and as they get older, they ignore things like their retirement, they ignore things like their family, they ignore their loved ones, their kids, and they just go around with their head in the bucket ignoring things. So it really stopped me from doing that. So that's a great little exercise. The next thing I want you to contemplate is that let's say you could ask yourself, your higher self, that the part of yourself that has in somewhere within the psyche of your mind has achieved and accomplished everything, and I want you to ask that part of your psyche, and you're going to write this down as well. I want you to ask that part of your psyche for some permission to do things, and I want you to ask that part of your psyche to give you permission to be free, to be awake, to be aware, to not hold back, to have courage, and ask that higher part of yourself, and write a letter to your higher self, and ask your higher self to give you permission to be all the things that you actually perceive you're not being in your life right now, based on the previous exercise and the habits and cycles that you've realized that you're still fulfilling and running in your life. The final thing I want you to contemplate then is this. Let's say you pass away and you're at your funeral. You're in a box and you're listening to your closest friend. It could be your closest confidant. It could be a family member, your mum, your dad, your brothers, whoever, friends, whoever. And you're listening to your eulogy being read out. How would you love to be remembered? And I want you to think about that question. How would you absolutely love to be remembered? And what are the things you would have fulfilled in your life that you would have loved to have been remembered for fulfilling? And as you remember those things, I want you to think about, you know, as these things are being read out, I want you to think about the amount of pride in the audience. I want you to think about the people's lives that you touched as a result of not holding back, of actually going for it and really setting yourself up in whatever way. I mean, I knew back then that when I was doing this exercise, one of the ways that I needed to set myself up was financially. You know, I needed to organize myself financially. I watched too many people in my life go through their lives not having any finances, no financial structures, you know, rewarding the bills company and the phone company and the gas company first, and, you know, not utilizing their wealth to build more wealth. Because wealth gives you freedom, and that's the way it is. Anybody who tells you otherwise is basically broke. So I want you to really contemplate that. You know, I want you to contemplate, how would you be remembered? And I want you to contemplate financially, how would you be remembered? In terms of your loved ones, how would you be remembered? How much love would there have been in the relationships? And, you know, if the people in the audience are remembering you, they're remembering you by tears flowing down the side of their face, and those tears are tears of absolute love and gratitude. So how would you be remembered? So I really loved these exercises, and they made a huge difference in my life because it stopped me from any of the repetitive cycles. It really helped me to harness, and I realized, you know, I didn't want to be remembered on my deathbed for leaving a burning trail of unfinished business, you know, people that I hadn't told I loved them, you know, girlfriends that I wasn't clear with, relationships that I'd messed up. I wanted to make sure that from that moment on, that every effort I made was to make sure that I was a loving, caring, compassionate, empathetic human being, and that I was touching and making a difference in people's lives. Guys, I trust that you've absolutely loved this information. Now, what I would love to do is continue this conversation online. So if you just drop a comment into the comment section and we'll get back to you. And the comment I want you to leave is, you know, I want you to think, what are you going to give yourself permission to do? So if your higher self is going to give you a piece of permission to do something, what is that you want to permit yourself to be actually able to do? On top of this, if this has moved you in some way, please feel free to share it on Facebook. We watch this happen all the time, and so many people get back to us and get moved as a result of these little snippets of information, because we always have someone in our lives that needs us to step outside of the square of normality and just, you know, do the things that you wouldn't normally do, like drop them a link to this or tweet them the message. So take care. I love speaking to you guys. Share your comments and we'll speak to you soon. Bye bye.